Welcome to Gourmet Brewing. I'm your host, Doug Piper, and I want you to know how much I appreciate you allowing me to join you in growing our beverage skills together. I'm a certified Cicerone, and I'm a certified BJCP beer and mead judge, and I'm working on advanced ranks. And these BJCP study groups and webinars are my way of sharing my beverage journey with you. We've had a couple of recent webinars. Had one actually just last night. Kind of had a double header this week. Travis Rupp of Avery Brewing on their Ales of Antiquity series. That was a lot of fun. Richard Priest on Kvike yeast. Really a spirited webinar. A lot of good discussion there. Had a little diversion with Cruve and Better Coffee and Better Beer. Scott Ungerman of Anchor Brewing led us in some conversation where he was telling us about his open fermentation. Laura Ngotti on recreating ancient mead recipes, and Jennifer Pereira on demystifying diacetyl. So if you missed any of these webinars, you can check them out and the rest of the previous programs by clicking the follow link in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. I'll also share a link in the follow-up email that's sent after the live event. Today, we have Terence Sullivan of Sierra Nevada Brewery in Chico, California, USA. Terence is the creative brand manager and brewery ambassador, but he's also worked for Robert Mondavi Winery and Golden Pacific Brewing prior to joining Sierra over 25 years ago. And in beer years, that's a long time. Terence focuses on getting new beers from concept to glass. So Terence, I'm going to bring you on screen here, and I want to hear about how nice the weather is in where you're from, and just remind everybody where you're from.
So I'm located out in our headquarters in Chico, California. So it's unseasonably warm this past February and March, unfortunately, no rain. So we're experiencing about 78 degrees today with north wind, which is supposedly storms coming in. So hopefully we'll get a little bit of rain, some snow, hopefully snowpack. That's what we rely on in this neck of the woods to keep us going until the next winter.
Wow. So. That's different than our weather. I'm in Greenville, South Carolina. We've had rain every third day, pretty much. And so I have found out my basement has more access to water than I ever realized.
Nice. Well, occasionally we're fortunate to get a lot of rain, but not so far this year. So hopefully we get a big March and April to
well, I hope so
we don't get back into drought situations again.
So Terence, you and I have been discussing doing this for some time, and I'm so excited you found time in your schedule to share your vast experience with us. Just for those that are just now tuning in or maybe have not been on one of the webinars before, can you share just briefly a couple of the highlights that you're going to talk about tonight?
Well, we're gonna go through our barrel aging program. So our extensive barrel aging program that we're doing. Talk about a few beers. We're going to open up some beers. Tell some Sierra Nevada stories. A little bit of history. Like you said, I've been here 25 years. I've seen Sierra Nevada change quite a bit over that time. I think we were 100,000 barrels when I first started, just went over 100,000 barrels. Now we produce upwards of 1 million barrels of beer. So the differences in what it takes to actually to do that. So I got to witness a lot of that. I started my career here as the very first graveyard brewer. So when I was hired and fully trained on, we started 24 hours, 7 days a week. Roughly, it was about 6 3/4 of days a week. I would shut down the brewery on Sunday night, and they would pop it back open at 4 in the morning. Yeah, so and that was on a 100-barrel system, and we were pretty much brewing in those days 360 2 days a year or something. I think we took a half day off on Thanksgiving, and they would take. I was the young brewer on shift, and everybody else had families, so I would always elect to do the early shift on Christmas Day, and go home and spend Christmas kind of by myself until my wife moved to Chico. So,
Oh, wow.
Oh, look, Susan's on there. There she is.
And we've also got some calibration beers, right?
We do have some calibration beers. We have we're gonna go through pale ale, and to kind of guide us into barrel aged beer, we are going to have just regular Narwhal, so our imperial stout that comes out in the fall time. So we're actually drinking 2019 is what I sent you. We'll drink through that, and then we will have the barrel aged Narwhal, which is bourbon barrel aged, and we'll taste and contrast and see what happens when a particular beer like that spends a journey of 12 months in a bourbon barrel, which is actually a fabulous thing. I think if I was to come back in another life, I'd want to come back as yeast that harbored inside of a bourbon barrel for 12 months.
But they die off.
I don't know. Can that happen? Yeah, they die off, but you know.
Oh, well, this is awesome. I can't wait to hear more, and I can't wait to jump into these beers. But just for those that this may be the first time they've ever joined one of these webinars, I want to just remind you that if the webinar is not playing correctly, maybe the screens are freezing or whatever, most of the time, if you just refresh your screen, it will work. Also, Chrome and Firefox work best for this particular platform that I use. And if you can't hear, double check that you've unmuted or turned up your speakers.
Down at the other day, right?
That's right. Down at the bottom, there's a Ask the Question button. And if you've got a question for Terence, please jump down there. It looks like we got 8 questions already in that, which I think is fantastic. We will jump into this and get those answers. We also have some polls, and the polls are kind of giving Terence a feel for where our audience is. The 2 questions are, have you ever tasted a Sierra Nevada barrel-aged beer before? Terence is still running about 3/4 no. So a lot of people have not had one. And have you barrel-aged a beverage before? And about the same number. So looks like 3/4 of our audience is not super familiar with barrel-aged flavors or barrel-aged brewing. These are part of a series of webinars that I'm helping the AHA and BJCP study groups that I'm part of. And if you're not a member yet and are interested in exploring the journey of becoming an advanced beer judge, you can either search the Facebook groups for BJCP 101, 201, mead or cider, or I'm going to copy and paste these over in the chat. And we would love to have you join us. There we go. We would love to have you join us. The 101 group is obvious. Mead and cider, I think, are obvious. And 201 is for more advanced judges, and those are the differences there. Also note, these webinars, while they're totally free to you, they're provided by the generosity of the gourmet brewing patrons through the crowdfunding site Patreon. This is the economic model that I'm using to fund these. And while Terence is not getting paid anything, nor am I, we provide these, and there are some direct costs that your funding helps offset. So if you would like to see more of these, please know they're 100% crowdfunded, and I hope you'll consider joining our Patreon supporters so future webinars can continue. I also want to thank Frank Christian for his recent financial support, along with regular Patreon supporters Andy Glidden, Brent Dingus, Omer Brashai, Clay Bunn, Dan Sakai, Gene Jockey, Jerry Pringle, Marino Lanza, Paul Clammer, and Brian Doubt. Everyone that has registered will get an email with a link to the recordings, any slides, and links to the four BJCP study groups. And also, just to make you aware, for those of you that are AHA members, I've been nominated for the American Homebrewers Association Governing Committee. There are 18 people running. You've got 5 votes, and if you're an AHA member, and voting is open through the end of March. So I would encourage you and ask you to consider voting. And if you like these webinars and would like to see the AHA consider more of these kinds of things, my being on the governing committee may have some influence there. And if you'd like to continue the conversation, I have another Facebook group that is strictly for gourmet brewing, which is a very broad topic. And I would encourage you to join that group also. So, Terence, now that I've got all that stuff behind us, I would love to see us jump into the program. As soon as I can click on the right button here, there we go.
In there. There I am.
We're going to jump into the secrets of Sierra Nevada's barrel aging program.
Well, you at the beginning, at the top of the feed there, you had added a couple links. So I'm going to go in a little bit of talking about one of them is on our barrel age program that we have at Sierra Nevada. And this really, it started out years ago where it was actually one of our brewers, actually worked in the cellar. He had done some travel, visited some other breweries, and it was probably the early 2000s, and he visited a couple people that were kind of playing with barrel aging stuff, and so he had this idea, we should get into doing some barrel aging program, and we were fortunate enough. There was a distillery down in, and it's still there down in Alameda, that got a hold of us, called St. George Spirits, and they had actually asked us if we would make wort for them, so that they could start making some whiskey, and so we started doing that for them, and in exchange they would throw some barrels our way. And so literally it first started out of taking some Celebration ale and aging it in some bourbon barrels that we served at our company party, Christmas party, and it was just it's the cat's meow at that party, and everybody really, Celebration ale right here. So everybody really dug it, and so we thought, okay, let's just start playing with this a little bit more, and then we started using just our regular porter and our regular stout, and starting get to know what happens in barrels, and the magic that can happen, and the actual nightmares that can happen as well. So I really want to talk about some of those. Early on, we had nowhere to really store the barrels. We have those that don't know out there, we do an extensive amount of bottle conditioning for our beers. Pale porter, stout, Celebration ale, and Bigfoot barley wine are all still bottle conditioned, and then the ones that are pale ale in a can is actually can conditioned. So we what we do is we filter the beers. We add we'll add sugar and yeast to the bright beer tanks, and then package, and then they see roughly 14 days in a 62-degree warehouse space. So our warehouses are extremely enormous for the size of our brewery, holding all that all that bottle conditioned beer. So it actually made for a really natural place for us to actually house our barrel program. The only problem is as we started to expand in our production of pale ale and Celebration ale around the 2005 to 2010 range, we would get really pressed for space. And so what this led to is we would have to maneuver those, as you see there, the barrels around our warehouse, and kind of pin them in certain locations. We'd drop barrels. We'd make a complete mess of our warehouse. Track a bunch of sticky beer around the entire, from our forklifts, around the entire warehouse, and it just became kind of a nightmare that was waiting for some sort of cross contamination or infection with all of our bottle conditioned beer. So it was probably I can't even remember the year, but it was probably right around 2012 or so, somewhere around there, where Ken started kind of talking to us about, okay, if we're going to kind of expand this and do it the right way, we need to figure out a place to store all of our barrels. Ideally would have been on site, but he had a warehouse that he owned in probably about 2 miles from the brewery, and so that is now our barrel room. We host some parties out there and have a good time out there, but mainly for storing barrels, we can roughly store about 2,500 to 2,800 of those oak barrels, those 55-gallon bourbon barrels that you saw in that photo. So it's quite a bit of capacity, but it allows us to also do some experimenting and things like that, and kind of keep everything off site. So it's not kind of some issues with cross contamination. We built a wall now, and we actually have a smaller little section of that barrel room that is used for doing sours and kind of playing with sours that we're still pretty young in kind of learning about those. And, we've produced a few beers in very small volumes that are sours. We have this great beer that we did called Big Chico Creek. It was really, really nice, kind of a traditional creek style. And there is a Big Chico Creek that runs through town, so it was only natural to call it a Big Chico Creek, right? So, but anyways, that's kind of how the barrel program really kind of started out, is really for fun, and we really enjoy. It's a little bit of it's some luck. It's a lot of art. It's a lot of tasting. It's definitely you have barrel, and we'll get into some of the questions that I'm kind of stepping ahead a little bit. But you're tasting the barrels, and yeah, some of them go south. Some of them are beautiful. Some of them we find they're so amazing that we actually kind of isolate them and do. Store them just for 5-gallon kegs that we use for special events and tap takeovers and things of that nature. I'll give an example. Just recently, and the thing about having 20, which is actually really cool, is having like 2,800 barrels. Some get lost, like you forget. They're all labeled, that we know what's out there. We know the inventory, but no one looks at a spreadsheet, and so sometimes I'll come across, recently they were doing some barrel aged Bigfoot that we were doing in kegs, and they came across some 5-year-old barrel aged Bigfoot, and so we kind of isolated some of those and saved them for a special occasion. So this is really beautiful beer.
Yeah, barrel aged Bigfoot sounds delicious.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you, because I know maybe hopefully there's some people out there that have tasted it. I'd like to see if anyone has tasted barrel aged Bigfoot and could write a little note there. But in my opinion, this is strictly my opinion, and I have a very strong one here at the brewery. Luckily, sometimes they listen to me. Sometimes they just tell me to shut up. But I will be honest, is Bigfoot is like sometimes a little too harsh. I've always actually asked, hey, can we make a more of a ramped down IBU version of our Bigfoot, maybe use the same hops and everything, but just not try to get as aggressive of a bitterness on it and age those in bourbon barrels. But like that 5-year one that we did, like that's what I loved about it, is because the BUs had kind of died off so much that that it was more kind of English, a little English style in its taste.
Yeah, I'll have to share an embarrassing story. I did a BJCP tasting exam Saturday a week ago, and Steve Morgan hosted that for us. And one of the beers was a 2008 Bigfoot.
Oh, wow.
And, in a tasting exam, you're told it's a barley wine, and an American barley wine. And I'm going, oh my gosh, where are the American hops? There were none, zero.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of my things is I really love, I love going through those, I don't do it all the time. I get invited. There's I'm going to forget his name, but there's someone in down in Sacramento area, and he has supposedly enough for several years of doing 25 years of Bigfoot. And he actually, I think he's done some where he actually auctioned them off for a tasting, and he donated the money to some homebrew club or something like that. So it was a really pretty cool idea. But I love the the nuances of how it changes, and I have my certain years that I like better than others, and for me, like ideally Bigfoot is I like for it to be at least about 6 months old, and I like it up to about 6 months old up to about 18 to 2 years is my ideal kind of range that I really like to taste.
My glass is empty, Terence.
Yeah,
I know. We start
mine.
with the first calibration beer.
I'm totally down with that. So I can open mine here too, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. Aha. Lovely. Oh, that's beautiful.
I might have to wait a moment to top that guy off.
You got a little aggressive on your pour, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah.
I'm doing it with the wrong hand.
I would tell you, Charlie Bamforth would be proud of you. You pour with vigor, right? So yes, and more maltiness with age on Bigfoot barley wine. Like definitely that maltiness really starts coming out, and getting kind of back to the Bigfoot. Some people might remember that are out there. I mean, we have 155 people. There's definitely probably some people that remember our bottles used to be twist off versus pry off crowns. And we really saw an aging difference, the pry offs and the twist offs after we switched over. So the pry offs tend to age a little bit slower. So, all right. So we're in our calibration beer, right?
Yep.
This is our flagship pale ale.
There we go. And that's how it's supposed to look, isn't it?
Oh, that's a beaut right there. That is a great pour. Yeah. So it's funny because I love when we don't enter it as often as we used to, but I love because if you go on the BJCP guidelines, right, is Sierra Nevada is one of the calibration beers, right?
It is.
And I love whenever we've entered this into the GABF before, and we've gotten comments of wrong category, which I always get a kick out of. But it's not dry hopped like a lot of pale ales nowadays are. It's aggressively hopped, late hop additions, 100% Cascade whole cone hops, 100% whole cone hops on this beer. We got a little C60 caramel malt in it. And so, just kind of add that hint of kind of amber color there.
So if you were to help us walk through, Terence, as the brewer, what are some of the descriptors you would use to describe the flavor and aroma?
Oh, it's like beautiful to me. It's like my life, really. I'm just teasing you. It has a lot of I get grapefruit notes. I love the fruitiness on it. It's probably got a little bit more that aggressive fruitiness for a lot from the bottle conditioning process with this beer. I love the it's got that classic Cascade piney hop character. Kind of pine needle or fresh cut pine notes to it. It's got a little back end malt sweetness to it, not overwhelming. The bitterness I think is absolutely beautiful for the actual beer that it is. It's just got a nice bitterness to it, not too aggressive, and enough so that it's there. 3 months old, good hop nose. Yes, I agree. It's one of the things we put on every one of our, well, not every one of our packages now that I look at some of our new beers, but Ken's original statement of purest ingredients and finest quality. Finest quality is definitely something that is instilled in every Sierra Nevada employee when they start working here. We take great pride in especially packaging, because as any brewer out there will know, your beer is only as good as how you package it, because you can take a absolutely phenomenal beer and screw it up in a matter of 12 ounces. 12 ounces at a time. Yeah. So yeah, and that's, so getting back to that too, that bottle conditioning flavor that's on this beer, that real fruitiness that kind of comes out of this. If you have done any bottle conditioning at all, you'll know, like for us, we're pretty much dialed in. So we do sensory every day on our release sensory. So pale ale actually comes up to our sensory department on day 10. That's usually when we taste it. If it's a weekend or whatever and it rolls over, we'll taste it day 10, 11, or 12, right? And us as sensory experts, at least for, I'll call us sensory experts because we know our beer really well. You can really start, you get a little diacetyl notes at 10 days whenever you're tasting it. Also too is like we'll see it in the wintertime when it's kind of funny because I'll tell a story that happened a long time ago. We would every once in a while, whenever it would come, December or whatever, and it still comes up. December, January, we always kind of, wow, the bottle conditioning process is taking a little bit longer. It's the little things that matter, right? So when your warehouse is 28 degrees, and the beauty of Mills River, actually, that's one of the things that we did, knowing that they have colder winters there. The warehouse where we store our glass is temperature controlled, where in Chico it's not temperature controlled. Or not as well. And so a lot of times you can actually look back at the calendar when you're drinking 10-day beer that's a little bit higher diacetyl levels. We can usually look back at the temperature 10 days ago, and it's pretty certain it's going to be around 28 to 32 degrees. So, putting 12 ounces of a beer that's 62 degrees into a bottle that's 30 degrees, it really kind of retards that fermentation process early on.
Well, Terence, is any last comments on the Sierra Nevada Pale Ale BJCP example style before we move into the next one, which is the Narwhal Imperial Stout? I didn't quite line that up right. There we go. So this is going to nicely lead us into our barrel aging discussion. Now, this one is not barrel aged, correct?
This is not barrel aged. So this is a traditional, and honestly, so this is in a program that we call our high altitude series. So Bigfoot is a high altitude beer. And the idea when we came out with this beer was to kind of something to complement higher ABV, the drinker that wants to have something, for a special occasion. And Imperial Stout was an easy thing for us to kind of think about. We had actually, so I mentioned Susan Rankert's on the listening in right now. She was part of our beer camp program that we had, and we really we had a lot of people that actually came through our beer camp program. And it's kind of a day in the life at Sierra Nevada, and you get to make a beer of your liking. We had a lot of people that made Imperial Stouts, so that was our playground to start learning about Imperial Stouts and making and dialing in this beer. The first year we actually made this beer, it won a silver medal at the GABF. And I was telling you that story last week is that same exact beer, we decided, let's put it in bourbon barrels, and the following year we entered it in the barrel age strong beer category, and it won the silver. So the same exact beer won the silver for Imperial Stout, and then the next year won the barrel aged program. But so anyways, barrel aged Narwhal, this is not barrel aged Narwhal, this is regular Narwhal. Just a beautiful Imperial Stout, all the characteristics that I haven't even stuck my nose in one of these in a while. So it's got everything you want, right? It's got the coffee, it's got the roast malts, it's got a little bit of tobacco, it's got a little bit of smoke. One of the great things that I love, I love drinking beer, you know that, Doug. But the memories that sensory brings to us, right? So I'm gonna go out there on a limb here and talk a little bit about sensory and how it garnishes these memories of fine things in your life, and one of them with stouts that have a little bit of tobacco and a little bit of smoke character to them remind me of my father. Not that it was a good thing, but my dad used to smoke cigarettes in the Rambler station wagon as we rode in the back seat, and it brings fond memories of those days when we would go on road trips. So it's kind of weird, kind of morbid, but hey, that's me.
It is such a smooth stout.
Yes.
It's just easy drinking, little chocolate, little coffee. It's not particularly bitter, just kind of a mild bitterness.
Yeah, it's got some hop bitterness. It's got a little bit of that kind of black malt bitterness to it, astringency. To me, one of the things I like about this beer is it's not overly sweet. A lot of times you can get Imperial Stouts, and as far as like home brewing, that's one of the things is like trying to kind of master that so you get a good amount of fermentable sugars in there so that you're not overly sweet and kind of off a little bit, but
So Terence, I'm intrigued with the glass. So can you share a little bit about this particular glass? It looks very special.
It is. It's our 40th year. So Ken started Sierra Nevada in November of 1980, and he had a dream of starting up a little brewery where he was gonna make a living for him and a few people, and it changed the world of craft beer. Or actually, like, I guess there wasn't a world of craft beer in those days. You know, there was Anchor, there was Boulder, there was New Albion, maybe Grants. You know, there was a few here and there scattered throughout the United States, but I don't think he ever envisioned where we are today, and that the influence that Sierra Nevada would have on the world of craft beer. You know, I told you I brought something special to kind of share to everyone. So we actually just packaged this, and we literally tasted it today. It'll be out next month, but it's a retro. We're calling it a retro pack of pale
hold it
ale.
back up, Terence.
Okay.
I'm
gonna get a bottle.
There we go.
So get a bottle of it. But it's our original label, and it actually on here it tells the story of. So we're gonna sell this one for a few months in the summertime, and so it tells the story of this label, right? And so Ken had this vision of whenever the artist actually first did it. It was green like today's label, where it was all green, but it was kind of a fade in and out of green. So whenever he actually sent this to the vendor to print the labels, he couldn't afford to actually go to the print shop and look at them because it was quite a drive away, and plus he was brewing all the time. So he couldn't afford to actually go. So he said, just don't worry about it. Send them, and then they came in and they had this like bluish, blue color on them, and he's like, that's going to have to just be it. Right. So that was the very first pale ale label, and the history behind it. And, but yeah, it's quite an honor to work with Ken Grossman and kind of realize what he has done for this industry and how much he's actually helped small brewers. And if you go back to his early days, he was fortunate enough to have Fritz Maytag that was close by, that really influenced him, helped him. Sold him equipment. He had a Doug Molman, who was a brewer at Anheuser-Busch he was the brewmaster in Fairfield, California, who they befriended each other, and Doug would help Ken out quite a bit with knowledge as well as some equipment and things of that nature that really kind of helped him get moving forward. I think I should probably start reading some of these things over here. Oh yeah.
Well, I was going to say, and speaking of Ken and Fritz, Ken, Fritz, and also Charlie Papazian had some items that were donated to the Smithsonian. Isn't that correct?
Yeah. That was actually really kind of neat. I think that was one of those ones when because I think you were actually at the brewery that weekend. Whenever he was there, he was actually had come down to babysit his grandkids, and stopped into the brewery and chatted with us a little bit. And he was like a kid at a candy store, picking out that kind of stuff. And Ken has always been that way. He's like really he loves eBay. I'll tell you that he loves eBay. He loves shopping around on eBay. And a lot of times, any home brewers out there, he'll actually call you out if you're trying to sell his kegs, because they belong to him. They don't belong to you. So anyways, just forewarning there, right? But Ken will get on there, and he loves buying like old historical stuff, And so if you actually come to our breweries, there is an aspect of it of a lot of old equipment and historical items, old shovels from hop harvesting day. And I told you about the barrel room. There's actually a same size room right next door to it that houses a lot of other stuff he's bought on eBay over the years of, malt barley bins. We just actually acquired, and we really want to kind of get it set up. UC Davis, the original brew house from UC Davis, which is a 5-gallon unit that I used to brew on whenever I went to school there, and probably quite a few other brewers. We really want to resurrect it and actually start brewing on it, because we probably figure there's more brewmasters that brewed on that system than any other system in the world.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Crispy Fry wrote in there. He said Ken dressed him down once for using a keg. So.
Oh yeah. Oh, he'll do that too. He'll doesn't matter whose brewery it is. He wants to know.
While we're talking about the breweries, the image behind me, can you share what that is?
Oh yeah, that's the tasting room. You look really good in there too. That's our tasting room in Mills River. So maybe a show of hands of how many people out there have been to the Mills River Brewery or the Chico Brewery. Mills River Brewery was we built that in 2014, and it was really I was going to say it's a really fun project, but it was actually really a pain in the ass. I gotta admit, it was long. It probably went over budget by a lot, but it is absolutely beautiful. It is maybe one of the most beautiful breweries I've ever stepped foot in, and I'm not saying that because I work for the company. It's and it's built the way a brewery is supposed to be built. If you've ever been out to Chico recently, you'll realize that it's almost, we call it, if you're familiar with Northern California, it's the Winchester Mystery House of breweries, because it's our bottle shop is probably 150 yards from where our filtration department is, and that's not really the most efficient way to run a brewery, but it's the only thing we could do back in the day. So and
the hallway right back there.
Right. That's
where all his tools are.
Oh yeah, down the hallways. Yeah. Cork floors and all the wood you see. Well, the wood on the ceiling there is all that's wood that was harvested on the from the property when we were building the brewery, and then all the you'll see the wooden staves from all of the barrels that make up the bar itself. Yep, exactly. And up around the edge of the entire facility is all barrel staves. Yep, all those
up there on the walls too.
Yep, it's pretty cool. So, yeah.
Well, and speaking of this, where we ran into Ken was actually right in this room. And it was at a Alpha Hops meeting. Now, I know you're going to talk about Alpha Hops, but you want to touch on it right quick since we were in one of the places.
Where's the glassware? We're going to use this at the very end. Wait, how do I get that so it's like kind of you can see I don't know. Yeah, maybe. It's a little wolf. But anyways, it's a private club that we started 5 years ago. So we're in the 6th year of it, and it's. Originally, it was, I think, 250 members, and it was not really talked about too much on our website, and it sold out really quick. And from that time on, we did a friends and family sign-up sheet. We've expanded this year. We're 450 members. Not certain we can go much higher than that, just to try to facilitate that many people. The beer part is not an issue, but so it's a private club. You get 9 different beers, 2 bottles of each. All of them so far we've always made are barrel aged beers, so some sours, but it's almost like a playground for us. So it's those little experimental batches. It only goes out to the actual members. We have 3 releases, so it's 3 different beers 3 times a year we'll release them, and we throw an absolutely, you've been to a few of them, an absolutely amazing party with where you get to try all the beers on tap. So you don't have to drink them right away. You can kind of play it by ear of how you think they're going to age out, and we give recommendations and serve you some food and some other nice beers, and have a good old time.
So Terrence, it is an understatement on finding out information on alpha hops, because
Yes.
I'm telling you, I knew what it was called, and it was almost impossible to get information. So I'm sure we've whet some appetites here. Can I share that info at Sierra Nevada email address?
Yes, that is alpha hop, one word, at Sierra Nevada. I'll type it in.
You type it in if you don't mind.
Yeah. So if I screw it up, it's my fault, right?
Well, no, I had my keyboard moved,
No,
so
I
I've
know,
got
no,
this
I'm
Narwhal.
I'm teasing you. I
See,
think I got that right.
I'm ahead of you here. I'm getting the next pour ready.
There it is. So we're sold out for 2020. But if you send me an email, I have a folder that I slide everything into that folder. And come next year when we send out the invites at the it's usually like October for the following year. I always include those emails in the friends and family email. So first goes out to the members. They get first right of refusal. So they usually we get 70% of the people sign back up, 75. And so we always have some memberships available at that point. So
well, anticipate 158 emails today.
Yeah, okay, that sounds good.
And it is, I will speak from experience. While it is not cheap, it is very unique, and you run into some great people. And to sit there and hang out for a few hours with Terence and Ken Grossman and other local brewers, it's just a unique experience.
Yeah, and for me, like running one of those programs, it's not as easy as it kind of sounds. To try to accommodate everybody's palate. The one beer that I loved in this last set was the Pigs in a Kilt, which was a barrel aged. It was barrel aged narwhal that was transferred into maple syrup barrels. Made up about 60% or a little bit more, is almost 70% of all the beer was that. And then we had a Scotch ale that was barrel aged in a true peated Scotch barrel. So it had the peated smokiness. And I don't know if you remember me saying it. It was almost like 3 beers in one. It had this kind of mapley aroma. The taste was definitely imperial stout with hardly any smoke on it until right at the back end. After you swallowed the beer, you got this kind of waft of like smoke.
I thought that one was phenomenal.
Yeah,
and it was just a delicious beer. Well, speaking of delicious beers,
yes,
we've got a Narwhal here that's barrel aged.
Mm-hmm.
I've got these guys lined up because you're going to kind of do a compare and contrast, right?
Yeah. So yep. So I know someone said on here it's hard to really find. Did you actually share that that search window with everybody, like for finding our beers?
I did not, but I might be able to find it. I'll send that with the follow-up email.
And that, to me, we have and I'm going to be honest with you, I'll probably get yelled at for saying this. And Susan and Jeff know me well enough that I like to share my true opinion. Our beer finder on our website is it needs some help. It works, but I like the one that I sent you. And so, anyways, because I punched in this beer from your zip code, and I think there was 17 locations where you can find it. This is I know Total Wines has barrel aged narwhal, but we just came out with this January. This is in 4 packs, 16-ounce cans. and it's phenomenal beer. And we just had a meeting this morning. We're talking about ramping it up for next year. We're planning on doing 1,200 barrels of this beer this year. So, anyways. All right.
Oh, wow. That is nice.
This is what happens when Narwhal spends 12 months into a bourbon barrel. Oh, and you're going to, right off the gate, you're going to get that kind of bourbon, that vanilla, kind of oaky characteristic. It's got a little bit of, you can kind of get a little bit of that bourbon character in the aroma for sure. The definitely the vanilla on the back end. Have you tasted it yet, Doug? It's fabulous.
I have. And what a nice beer to barrel age to begin with, because your stout is relatively subtle compared to a lot of stouts. And so it leaves plenty of room there for the vanilla and the bourbon characteristics to just be a nice, complex drink.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
really nice beer.
I would agree 100%. You know, that's a great way of describing that. You know, I think the balance of our imperial stout, just the Narwhal itself, of how it's so balanced all the way across the board. You know, it's nowhere overwhelming in certain characteristics. They're all just well matched together. Really does lend to accentuating the bourbon barrel in this version, just because it that kind of comes to the front of the beer, I would say, and that's what leads it along the way, and I think that's what you want in a barrel aged beer, in my personal opinion.
So Terence, this is a good chance. I'm going to look at the poll again, and the poll says, "Have you ever tasted a Sierra Nevada barrel aged beer before?" And we're about split, 50-50.
Okay.
And the same is, have you ever barrel aged a beverage before? So half our audience, you know, has really not had a barrel aged beer. So can you walk us through what the barrel age, the flavor descriptors of, and touch on the Narwhal to begin with, and then the characteristics that are added when it is barrel aged?
Well, what I pick up on these for sure is, you know, we were talking a little bit about on the regular Narwhal of kind of that bitterness and the astringency that's nice. You know, it's there. You really start kind of losing some of that. I get a little bit more, like if I go side by side on these beers, you know, you have that bitterness and you have that kind of astringencies a little bit, pops a little bit more. And once you get it now in that bourbon barrel.
Is that from the wood, the astringency?
Well, no, I was talking about the astringency on just the regular Narwhal.
Right.
And how I find that it mellows it in the bourbon, and maybe some of that too is like I get this almost kind of residual sweetness, a little bit more sweetness out of the bourbon barrel version. I wouldn't say that it's actually analyzed as a sweeter beer. It's just the perception that you get. I think once you start,
probably the vanilla notes.
Yeah, I think once, and also once you start like losing a little bit of that bitterness and astringency over time for the aging, you know, the oxidation that takes place during the barrel aging process is probably going to you know, kind of round out those flavors and kind of mold them a little bit more and soften them, I guess is probably a great way of saying that. But, you know, honestly, like, you know, us as, and kind of going back to that of like the history of building our barrel program is like, you know, one of the things that, going back to saying what Ken kind of thinks of quality and quality standards, one of the biggest no-nos is oxidation, right? And he is just a stickler on the canning line, and the bottling lines must, adhere to a certain, DO amount, and what our levels can be, and what we put on hold and what we dump if our DOs get too high. And when you think about it, you're taking beer and you're putting it in a barrel that's going to swell and contract and all that kind of stuff, and you're literally splashing it into a barrel that has very little CO2 blanketing or anything like that, and so it's kind of contrary, but some beers lend to that. You definitely don't want to oxidize an imperial stout, but once you start putting it in a bourbon barrel and you start getting some bourbon characteristics or rum characteristics or some of the spirits that are in there, it really it can be magical, and that's kind of what I was telling you, a little bit of that art and magic that happens when you're barrel aging.
So comparing these two, and for the 50% of the audience that never had a barrel aged beer, essentially the Narwhal has chocolate, coffee, little bit of hops. It's not terribly bitter, and most of the hops don't seem to be terribly citrusy.
Yeah,
they seem to be more like European hops to me.
Yeah.
And then you add to it the barrel aging, which is, how long do they age in the barrel?
It's roughly 12 months. I think if we averaged them out, obviously this is a blend. Each one of our packagings is roughly about 800 barrels of, more like 600 barrels that we're doing at a time when we're doing this. So you're going to have anything from 10 to 14 months. Sometimes some of them are 16 months old. So
you're adding to the chocolate and the coffee, basically bourbon and vanilla.
Yeah.
And just a smoothness, I think, that just is uncharacteristic from a normal imperial stout. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that and that's I tend to like bourbon barrel aging a little bit more than working with some other spirits. And again, that's my personal opinion. We have some of our barrel guys that really love the rum, using rum barrels. Rum barrels are tough because the quality that you get sometimes. I know when we were first kind of sourcing out barrels until we got some kind of suppliers we could really rely on and allow them to kind of pick and choose our barrels for us prior to them actually getting to the brewery. We did some thinking of nightmare scenarios, is we did a pretty good run, not a lot. I mean, it was 20, 40 barrels or something. And it was a rum barrel age. I want to say it was a quad, maybe Belgian quad. And when they were kind of tasting the barrels, probably some of them skipped them and they didn't really kind of like notice when they were doing the blend tasting of adding everything. But when we got it into sensory, we dumped every bit of it because it was so metallic, and it made us go to the barrels and look at the barrels, and some of them had like chunks of steel inside the barrel. So whether that was used at the rum distillery or whatever, I don't know. But we've had the same problem with like tequila barrels where there was nails hammered that they couldn't see. Like they had puttied over the nails, and the nails were sticking into the beer. And so it was probably okay for, they probably wanted that characteristic in whatever tequila they were putting it in, but, or whatever barrels they were for. But when we got them, and of course they're going to dry out a little bit, these nails rusted, and then we're adding beer on top of it, and you end up with this super metallic crap.
So Terence, we're at the bottom of the hour, and so I wonder, before we jump into the questions, it looks like you've got 15 of them. It looks like in the chat, there's a lot of questions really associated with aging. You know, is there any Brett that you pick up with age? Do you think this can would age well? So can you talk about the aging side?
So yeah, so one of the things that again getting back to Ken and his stress on quality and how quality matters. One of the things that we did do when we started to expand our barrel program is we put in a pasteurizer, and so we do a little flash pasteurization of all of our barrel aged beers. A lot of the alpha hop ones, though, that we used to make, we didn't have enough volume to actually do it. So anything that's going to see a packaging line, so whether it's going to go into a bottle or in this case a can, is actually pasteurized. So we don't want to run that risk, infecting hundreds of thousands of barrels of pale ale and torpedo and hazy little thing and all those kind of things. So we did actually implement that. Ken was always kind of more of a traditional brewer and not really into pasteurizing, but when you're starting to mess with barrels, it's a non-traditional aspect. And we do some stuff with wine barrels that are probably going to hold some Brett more than maybe a bourbon barrel or anything like that. We do pasteurize. So
as we're talking about barrel aging, do we want to open this guy?
I'll open it. Yeah, sure. So this is okay. Now we're going to get into kind of some far out stuff. So I was telling you about this, and I decided, okay, I'm going to send this to you because I was telling you about it last week. So I answer a lot of our questions on Beer Advocate that we have, and one of them was around this beer, and one of someone that was chiming in on there was saying how to take a IPA and age it in bourbon barrels is absolutely idiotic. Which I will tell you, when we were first introduced to do this by our barrel program, both Steve Dressler and myself said the same exact, we had the same exact sentiments about it. And until we tasted it. And then we went, holy moly. Okay, you can do this.
Ooh.
So
nice sound to it.
I would say that what lends to it a little bit is Torpedo is not a traditional IPA by today's standards, right? Torpedo is a little bit on the maltier side. Hop wise, it's very aggressive. So this is our alpha hop class. So get this all looking pretty for you. Oh, that looks gorgeous, Doug. So
that is a beautiful beer.
Yeah, this is not a traditional thing, and then so this is one of those ones where you actually let your barrel guys go to town. Let them kind of be artists. Let them be creative because you never know what you'll get on the other side. And so they had this idea they were going to take Torpedo and they're going to age it in bourbon barrels, and they were going to. And this is not barrel aged that long. It's roughly probably on average. Most of the barrels are probably six to 7 months old. But they dry hop the barrels prior to pulling the beer out. So as it's sitting in the barrel, probably at about 5.5 months of age. They're going to aggressively dry hop those barrels with whole cone citra hops, and let it do its work. So this, again, you kind of get that bourbon hit. You get a little bit of vanilla in the nose.
Yeah, but the hops are so subtle.
Yeah.
I mean, for a torpedo, which is one you just ram the hops in, it totally unexpected.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit of hops.
Yep.
And a little bit of bourbon, but just kind of a touch and a little.
Well, I always feel that torpedo it's got a little bit of fruitiness, but I've always felt that it has it's got almost a cedar wood characteristic to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I describe it in our sensory tastings. It's got some pine citrus type of notes, but I do get that cedar wood characteristics, which I think actually comes out in this.
Do you remember what I told you when you told me that you were going to send this? Mm-hmm. And I said it probably tastes like toothpaste and Coca-Cola.
Yeah. Does it taste like toothpaste and Coca-Cola?
No, my gosh, it is good.
Yeah, it's really
So, and cedar is an excellent description. I guess that is the hops just mellowing out.
Yep.
And a little bit of the bourbon and I guess oak.
Yep. And this torpedo has a lot of Magnum hops in it. It's got citra hops. So a lot of those Magnums I think come through on it. Magnum's not a traditional dry hop or a late hop to add or dry hop with, but it works on this beer. And I think a lot of it has to do with just the maltiness of torpedo. Torpedo came out right about the time that IPAs were starting to, it's 10 years old. Last year was its 10th year since we came out with torpedo. So torpedo is, the process of torpedo is kind of the aging process. I'm going to get a little funky on you here. I'm going to do something we didn't go over, earlier, but I'm going to pull up those torpedo pictures I brought up.
I'm trying to remember. I'm almost thinking I messed up and did not get those on that.
No, you didn't. But can I share my screen?
Yeah, of course you can.
Okay, if I remember how do I do that again?
Go up to the top with that little gear symbol.
Oh, and it says share, right?
Yep, that's all there is, and you did it before, so
yeah, I can do it. Let's see. That's not the same.
I'm gonna close that down.
Okay, where's the gear?
Top center. Put the pointer up right about your hairline.
I got it. Sorry. Hey, if this is really boring, I apologize, but I'm gonna figure out how to do this here. Come on, I'm old. Well, I'm old. I'm 52 years old. I can't work these things all that great. Oh, there's my screen, right? Okay, here I go. Okay, here, bear with me here. I'm going to show you what the torpedoes look like. Oh, that's a video. I don't want to do that one. I'm going to go, hold on.
Well, but we can see them.
Okay, yeah, that's the torpedoes. I'm going to close this and I'm going to open up dang it, I'm screwing up your show here.
Just click on that. It says, there you go.
Okay, all right. Here we go. Okay, this is where the pictures start. And I'm going to go full screen on here. I'll figure out how to do this thing in a minute. Okay, there we go. Right. So that's what the torpedo contraption looks like, right? Okay, so the small thing, this right here, this is the pump, right? And so this, I call it an octopus. So what we do is this entire vessel has a cage inside of it. So perforated cage, it's got a top to it. It's got a bottom, sidewalls slide in there. The bottom here has a centered rod that comes up through the center of the vessel all the way to the top of the bed of hops with perforations in it. So we'll take beer out of the tank. So coming out of one of these pipes, I can't remember if it's which way is it going? It's going this way, down through this pipe here. It gets distributed into the torpedoes and comes out through this valve here in the tank. And so, yeah, see, you got the down arrow. So your beer is coming out of the tank here, coming through here, coming through the pump, going through the bed of hops. We set the flow rate so that there's an even amount going through each torpedo. We run them for about 24 hours, and it drives back up into the tank. And these will be different diameter pipes so that we get a little more velocity through a smaller pipe coming in than coming out. So let's see if I can, there's the pumps kind of together. And that's what the torpedo looks like, just sitting there. So you actually, if you go in there, what do you got? You got Crystal Mylar, you got Magnum, and you got Citra.
So as you're talking about this, can you explain?
That's literally, if anyone wants to steal that, that's the dry hopping recipe right there. Amounts used, those are pounds, 160, 138 pounds of citrus. So, okay, go ahead.
And those are whole cone hops, correct?
This is, yeah, but as you'll see Mylar here, we take a portion of our hops. I was actually telling you that before, is to try to ensure freshness throughout the calendar year of making beer. Obviously, we're harvesting once a year, and we want especially with whole cone hops, we want them to stay as fresh as long as we can. So we'll actually take that and Mylar wrap a certain portion of them and use those over time.
So just to explain, I guess, a little bit, the hops are just amazingly subtle. I would say they're almost similar to your Sierra Nevada Pale Ale once they've been barrel aged.
Yeah.
So can you explain a little bit what's going on there?
Actually, I'm gonna jump over here because someone said, and it was the same thing you said the other day. I have a Randall for dry hopping. That's in essence, and you said that whenever I was showing you that picture, you're like, oh, that's like a giant Randall, and it absolutely is a giant Randall. But we are actually going to say Sam Calgione stole the idea from us to make a Randall. Just saying it. Not really.
And you just done so publicly.
I'm teasing.
Oh,
Sam's a good guy. Okay, so that question again.
Yeah. So I think at this point, do you have like a closing comment you want to make on barrel aging? And we jump into the question because we have 17 of them. Okay.
And I know it's probably going to be within some of the questions that we have, going back a little bit into barrel aging is you never know what you're going to get. It's almost like home brewing in a lot of ways. It's like, I always tell, new and up and coming homebrewers, and I homebrewed before I started working here, is, always document what you do. I think if you really want to try to improve your skills, always write down what you're doing and kind of take some notes. If you can't remember them, definitely write them down, but some mental notes. And the beauty of homebrewing is experimenting. I think one of your links that you have there is Ken's original pale ale recipe that's scaled down to a 5-gallon batch. We'll get homebrewers sometimes that kind of get on us a little bit, like, hey, I added the C60 you told me, and my Celebration Ale mock-off is a little darker color than yours. Every brew house is different. We have a different pale ale recipe. It's not directly, even though we have we have a 200 barrel brew house in Chico and a 200 barrel brew house in Mills River. The recipes don't line up exactly right, so we manipulate those recipes as well, just to, you're going to have different boiling efficiencies and different efficiencies throughout the process in your brew house. So same with barrel aging. You're going to, every once in a while, you're going to get something that's not that good, but you gotta keep going. And I know one of the questions is in regards to, I think it was yours about, how do you how do you ensure that you're going to have something that's good? And, I definitely think start playing early on, playing with styles that kind of are more favorable to dry hopping, barrel aging. So getting into something, like an imperial stout or something that has a little bit more forgiveness. If you want to drink every ounce of your beer that you're making, so when you're looking at an imperial stout, it can maybe hide some flaws. You go back 40 years ago when Ken was starting the brewery, his first batches of beer, I think 9 batches of beer that he made were his stout recipe, so he could get the brew house dialed in before he was going to waste a pale ale. So that's always a trivia question on all of our stuff. What's Ken's very first beer he ever made? And it's a stout. So, so that being said, some beer styles are more favorable to barrel aging than others. But like you say, okay, they're not favorable, so the IPA, and then I give you this, and you go, wow, that's really good, because you can make magic every once in a while.
It is phenomenal, I will have to say, and totally unexpected, and it's unusual to barrel age lighter colored beers too, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And definitely, you're going to add some color to it too. Someone asked here, porter may be interesting. I would highly suggest barrel aged Baltic porters are killer.
Well, is that sort of the difference there? Because isn't your torpedo about the same color as the pale ale?
No, it's a little darker. It's always a little darker. And definitely, it's probably picked up a little bit of color from what torpedo is. It almost looks a little, to me, it's got a little more of a brown hue to it than what traditional torpedo is, like maybe a little bit more red than this one. So it'll pick up some color during that aging process. So getting back to that Baltic porter, also too, I would encourage people, if you're going to really play with barrel aging beers, start playing with some things to add to it. A Baltic porter with some toasted coconut. That good. Really
I like Peter's question, and we'll move into the rest of them, but I think this is a good one. Peter says, given that pasteurization is used, presumably there's no benefit for further aging, and I assume he's presuming like our Narwhal in the can.
Yeah, that would be my assumption, is what he's getting at. That and yes, I would agree with that. Although I would say that when we played with that before, when you start getting into some beers like barrel aged Narwhal, you're probably not going to have too much negative aging characteristics, in my personal opinion, if you kind of age that out. Because we've had barrel aged Narwhal bottles that we originally did that will pop, and they're you start getting a little bit more like chocolate notes, and yeah, you get some oxidized notes, you get maybe a little bit of you can perceive them, the soy sauce type of characteristics that you would generally see with oxidation.
If soy sauce is subtle, though, I don't find it objectionable.
No, and it depends on what kind of beer it's in too. So that's so definitely, some of the lighter styles, if you took a lighter porter style, you would probably want to drink that pretty fresh. That's one of the things with my Alpha Hop Society. It's, you tasted that one beer we did, a cream ale, orange cream ale. That
was very nice.
Yeah, that was done in bourbon barrels and with fresh orange rinds in it, and it is phenomenal. I can't see that thing aging at 6 months. And honestly, I'm gonna be totally upfront. Is literally every single beer that we put into package that's something new for us, we don't even know. Like I always tell the members of Alpha Hop, I'm giving you a suggestion of how long you should maybe like drink this within 6 months. And I don't know, maybe it's better after 6 months, maybe it's not. We just try to go off of what historically we've learned over time, and sometimes we're wrong, and sometimes we're spot on right. But
let's move into the questions if you don't mind, Terry.
Yeah.
All right. So
me, I'll just keep rambling.
Yeah, and those of you that may need to go because you've given us a lot of time already, know if you've asked a question, you will get an email with the question being answered. So if you need to cut out, we completely understand that. I hope you'll all stay, but I appreciate your generosity and your time today. So we are going to move into the questions. And Chris says, thanks for all you, Ken, Brian, and the entire team do. So thank you, Crispy. So the first question, Terrence, is when do you know a barrel is no longer suited for beer? I know bourbon/rum character fades in a few batches. Can you rechar the inside and restore the ends?
We ain't gonna bother doing that. No, that's a great question. We've played with a little bit of second use barrels. Generally speaking, everything we produce is single use, and I know that's very expensive, especially very expensive for smaller breweries. We've just found that some of the characteristics, especially when you start aging beers for 12 months in some of those barrels, you really it's less than ideal for the following flavor. So like especially like something like our barrel aged Narwhal, the one that we tasted that's in a can, this will probably always be single use bourbon barrels for the sheer fact of we have to match consistency from year to year, or sorry, batch to batch, and if we carry this this particular package on for several years as a brand of ours, we don't want it to vary where it starts kind of getting a little bit softer in bourbon characteristics. So that said, we haven't done a lot of research and look. I know we've done second use, and it's definitely noticeable that it's dropped a little bit. Now you can blend that with one use barrels, single use barrels, and probably be perfectly fine. We did do some experiments with some, third use is you're spent, you're getting a lot of just oak barrel characteristics, which aren't bad either for certain style beers, right? So.
Thank you, Joseph. I had that same question. So our next one comes from Jimmy. And by the way, if you've got to run, everybody gets one vote. So if you see a question there, you won't push to the top. Look into the questions, put in your one vote, and that will be answered quicker than the others.
Joseph has a good point there too. Sour, using it for sour use. So taking some of those spent barrels and using them. I assume that's what he's referring to.
So Jimmy asks, what are some homebrew scale options for getting barrel character? What products are more ideal and less ideal? What would be the minimum barrel size you'd recommend? 5 gallons, 15 gallons?
I probably, I don't know if I can really answer that great. If I was, and obviously we don't do a lot of stuff with homebrew scale. But if I was going to go that route, and probably some people can chime in over here on the side and probably answer it way better than I can. Spiles and actually soaking spiles. I would definitely soak. I wouldn't just add bourbon directly in. I would save the bourbon for a glass of ice and go that route personally. But I would start small. I would start with 5 gallon if I was going to do it, and and so you're not getting too far in and too committed to it. So,
and taste all along.
oh, I think so.
Yeah.
We've definitely, you're going to want to give absolutely some time, right? But we found barrels that we lost. I was telling that story. We lose barrels all the time in that room, and we've grabbed some barrels that were less than ideal. That went like, oh wow, they went way too far, and we're too. I don't know. It's weird because we're a big brewery, but we're pretty frugal about certain stuff. I mean, Ken still, he drives just a normal car, and definitely we've come back to barrels and went, whoa, holy mackerel! It's almost like it went on a cycle of like, oh well, it's way too long in the barrel. Let's dump it. No, let's not dump it. Let's just hold on.
So is that a real important point, Terence? If you taste it and you hate it, don't dump it. Leave it in there some longer.
I guess it depends on what part of hate that you found.
It tastes like rocket fuel. Are we done?
Yeah, probably so. If it's vinegar, yeah, you probably don't want it. But definitely we've had some that have gone sour on us that we went, well, let's move this to the other room and start running this in the sour program. Definitely we've had some that have gotten some bread in them, and we move those over into the sour room and use those to blend in on some really killer beers. All
right. So good question, Jimmy. Again, vote up the questions if you want some pushed to the top. The next one is from Scotty B. And he says, what type of barrel would you not use?
I don't know if there's really a type of barrel I would not use. Probably Tabasco. But definitely.
How about one with metal in it?
Yeah, one with metal in it. Don't use those. Make sure whatever you're doing, you're inspecting, especially if you're on a kind of a larger scale and you're maybe brew pub in it, and you got some. You're going to invest a little bit on some barrels. Do some great investigation of the barrels. Know where you're buying the barrels. Know. I will say some of our absolute best results are when we get wet barrels. So when they're pretty close, like if they're bone dry, that's whenever you start getting some worries with infection and some other issues that you might run into down the stretch.
Well, just as a sensory aspect, if it looks good and smells good, is that a good rule of thumb?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much what we do. We get a flashlight, inspect the inside, kind of look around. You're looking for any dry spots, any mold, anything like that. You're definitely smells good. Yeah, that's a key. Yeah.
Okay. So evaluate it like you would a good beer.
Yeah, I remember one time we did this when there was the hop shortage back in 2008 or whatever. We had that big hop shortage, and of course we were well leveraged on hops, and we got a call from Brew Dogs, and they needed some hops, and they're like, whatever you got, and we're like, yeah, we got a lot of Cascade. You want some Cascade? And they're like, yeah, we'll send you some barrels, and so they sent us some barrels. And if you actually go to that forum, our blog page about barrel aging, there's a picture of me and one of my coworkers, Jeff White, one of our head barrel guys, rolling some single malt Scotch barrels out of a container. And I am not going to lie. When we opened up that container, the barrels were so wet that were in there that it absolutely reeked of single malt Scotch. And we swore by the end of transferring all those barrels out of that container, that both of us had a slight buzz from just the alcohol in the air. So when they talk about the angel share, it was definitely riding at the top of that container. It was pretty awesome. It's highlight of my career. One of the
All right,
highlights of my career.
good question, Scotty. Jimmy has our next. Well, let's see. This thing is not reordering like it should. So I think actually Jason has our next question. How do you prepare a barrel for a follow-on beer after you've used it once? Cleaning products and temperatures.
We've maybe rinsed, with like some sort of sterile water, like ozonated water, and then purged really well. We've literally, like, knowing that we're going to top off those barrels, we would transfer out and then bring beer right back on them.
So coming back to what you would do and evaluate it, if it looks good and smells good, you just clean it up good and move on?
Yeah.
Good question. All right. Next one. Jimmy, let's see. Why this thing's not reordering. Okay. Nick asks, can you recommend sources for barrels?
Oh, I don't do that anymore. That would be one of those ones. If you wanted to, we suggested that if you want to email anything to me, info@Sierra Nevada would be perfect, and just address it that you want the question to go to me. And I can run that down. I don't know who. It's changed so many times over the years, and it's. I honestly don't know. They have several vendors that they purchase through, and I couldn't tell you exactly. And different vendors for different styles. We have a couple like really nice Kentucky bourbon barrel suppliers that really.
It sounds like that one's an uphill question, though. You don't deal in small quantities.
Yeah. Well, I don't even do that part of it anymore. I was barely in that process years ago. I let the barrel guys take care of that stuff, and they know where to get them. So
I know, Nick, I've had a little bit of luck talking to local distillers and getting on their list.
Oh yeah, that great suggestion. Yeah, thanks, Doug. Thanks for picking that one, because that's definitely
there. One contribution.
Yes. Well, I mean, literally, like it's one of those things. Like they always say it takes a lot of beer to make great wine. Winemakers love trading wine for beer, and same with spirit makers or distillers are definitely in that favor too. So believe me, we get a lot of beer down to St. George Distillery, and we get a lot of barrels and other stuff in return. So
all right. So Jimmy has another question, and I'll also read Joseph had given him an answer. So that'll give you a chance to think a moment and maybe enjoy some of this beer that we haven't finished yet. Is there a simple time frame for how long to store clean beers or mixed fermentation beers so you aren't constantly opening the bung? And while you're thinking, Joseph answered, I have drilled a small bore in my barrels and seal it with a stainless nail. I sample the beer until good beer and then rack it.
That's exactly what we do. All of our barrels, and we have a fun little game when we go on tours. It's called Pulling the Nail, and that's a joyous time. But yeah, we ran into issues with that. We tended to see more barrels kind of go south on us when we were constantly pulling the bung out the top. And you got to kind of Ken has always wanted us to fix that entire room where every single barrel had a little bit of positive CO2 pressure on it. We've never really got around to doing it. It'd be an absolute nightmare. But again, he's a perfectionist. So if he's listening in, that'll probably be back on the the top of the list of things to do. But anyways, I just reminded them. But anyway, so that being said, the nail is the best option, and we learned that from Vinny Chilurzo over at Russian River. He kind of taught us that. He's like, stop getting that wine thief and taking it out of the top. Just put a nail hole in it. So you'll want to put a nail hole in just before you fill it, and get a stash of stainless steel nails. Good.
All right. Next question. I'm scrolling through these again. Vote if you want to hurry one up. This one comes from Jason. A bit like Jimmy's questions, for small scale, can we achieve similar result with oak chips?
Absolutely. I think so. Yep. Absolutely. And I would, if you want bourbon characteristics, I would soak them. I think that's it's one of the best things to do. We did a lot.
What is the difference between soaking and just adding a little bit of bourbon?
I don't know. It just makes me. I feel better about it. Right? You're just taking a jug and.
I like that answer.
You know, it's like seems like it's and probably also too is you're going to get you're going to wet that oak too. I think you're going to wet those spiles, and you're going to get a maybe and I don't know, who knows if that actually, because we know that like a wet barrel, you're going to get a slow absorption of the bourbon as everything kind of comes to equilibrium of through osmosis of that little bit of beer going into the barrel and that little bit of bourbon coming out of the barrel, and where you get a slower process, I guess, than just dumping a glugger of whiskey in your barrel. I mean, so sure.
The short answer is absolutely.
That'll work. I mean, they both work, and I don't know. It's just something about the I don't know, the nuances of soaking that, and it's kind of it's like the ritual of working through a recipe as you're making dinner, right? It's like some of the
little. Now Andy adds an interesting comment. He says probably not great for head retention to add liquor.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Good
point, Andy. Awesome. All right, we got we got a dozen more. So again, vote them up. Next question. Barrel aging seems risky and can yield unpredictable results. So when barrel aging, how can you maximize the chances of a delicious barrel aged beer?
Who asked that question?
That was me.
Oh, okay.
I'm like Ken. I'm into this low risk stuff.
I think that's what I was getting at, is like starting to look at different, and until you really want to experiment and go out there and like, oh, okay, I'm gonna barrel age a IPA, which most people would think you're an idiot for doing. But we like to maybe prove them wrong. I think you start getting into those styles that lend better to barrel aging. Your imperial stouts, your darker, robust porters, your quads. We've aged Belgian doubles that were killer.
So as a percentage, what could you throw out a number of what percentage of your beers turn out acceptable and you don't have to dump when barrel aging? Just a wild guess. I'm sure it's not a statistic.
Yeah, I would say probably. I would say if I had to throw a number down, I bet we dump 15 to 20%. Maybe not quite that much.
So 80 or 85%.
Yeah, and we'll really hold on to some. Like the Scotch in that we put in that Pigs in a Kilt. Like it's really. I mean, if you love peated single malt Scotch, it's awesome as a standalone beer. But your window of drinker is about this big. So if you can blend it with some maple syrup barrel aged Narwhal, you're probably gonna get quite a few more consumers that are going to be like, oh yeah. I mean, but we still do those other ones too. It's just, that's what I think the really beautiful thing is when you start getting a barrel room like we have, and you start kind of having all these barrels around. That's some of the funnest stuff is like pulling the nails and like, oh yeah, okay, we got a habanero. What did we do? We did a saison with habaneros in a sherry barrel. They're just killer. But like, oh man, not too many people are like, okay, here, blend this brown ale into it, and it's like, oh wow, it just like kind of all those flavors just meld together, right? And so that's
Crispy Fry says a Tabasco barrel aged Pilsner for the next seltzer.
Yeah, right. I like that.
All right, next question. And again, vote them up if you're in a hurry to hear the answer. This one comes from Paul. Can you explain your standard operating procedures once you receive a barrel and start filling it up? Do you empty the remaining liquor that is still in the barrel?
We actually do, and I'll tell a little. I'm gonna get myself in trouble. So they used to.
You're amongst friends here, Terence.
I know. No. I'm worried TTB's listening. No. I should have said that. Huh? Anyways, it's we dump them out, especially if they're really really wet. Technically, we're not supposed to go over a certain ABV when we're adding to those barrels, or we try not to really, because then you start getting like it's getting too hot and you got almost too much stuff going on. We drain them out, and we've literally at one point, I know we got this big run of bourbon one time, and they were so wet that we almost filled a 5-gallon bucket of barrel strength bourbon.
Wow.
We dumped it down the drain.
That is a really good question, though. I like that.
Yeah.
All right. Our next question. Prior to blending barrels to do a bottling run, are you doing QC? And to what extent do you isolate barrels with issues or dump them? Goose Island many years ago ran an infection with, I don't know that I can pronounce this. I will try. Baduna, maybe. That black mold that occurs on the rick houses at distilleries in Kentucky. Have you ever had issues with that? Thanks for sharing your knowledge. This comes from Todd.
We have I know we've seen it because we've seen it on the barrels on the outside. We generally kind of isolate those out. Probably some of those when we've done really small runs of barrel aged beers, and especially ones, a lot of times we're doing very small volumes, maybe like 25-gallon kegs, and we're doing them for events. And we generally always have, it's a supporting beer for an event. We'll always have somebody that's very knowledgeable in our styles of beer and what we're doing, whether it's a brewer, myself, or Ken, or Steve Grossman. So a lot of times we'll taste beers. We've rarely, been at a festival or at an event and said, "Ooh, we're not going to pour that." So we probably had something similar in our barrels at some point. We get to a point when we're doing small runs like that, and our micro department doesn't even care to look at it because they know it's going to just be loaded with certain molds or bacteria. As long as it's not beer spoiling, we'll look at it generally on beer spoiling bacteria. But that said, we do taste the barrels. So when we're actually going through, the guys will bring all the beer to the brewery when we're transferring into tanks. We use a simple piece of chalk. So they'll line up 20, 30, 40 barrels and go through and taste each one of them and give it a check or give it an X. And X gets stumped, and that's probably that 15% that we see that probably go down the drain, and we don't add those. So
it sounds like you're primarily dependent on your sensory aspect of it. Taste it as you go along.
Yeah, and it is also the quality control aspect of it. Like as I was saying earlier, when we're doing it in large runs that are going to see a shelf and a can or a bottle that could have some issues with exploding bottle or a can or something of that nature, where we would have some secondary fermentation that's going to go nutso on us. All those beers are pasteurized, so that we're ensuring, and those we will run through micro, just to check our system and our P's and Q's.
Okay, Terence, we do have a hard stop in a little over 14 minutes, and we have 9 questions to go. So we're going to probably have to do quick questions from this point going forward. Quick answers, excuse me. Andy asks, before you put a beer in a barrel for the first time, do you have any sort of procedures in place to sanitize the barrel to decrease likelihood of contamination? And before you answer, Joseph says sometimes the Brett pedo character, etc., acts as a complexity to the vanilla notes in an oak barrel.
So getting to that first part, we have, and I kind of misspoke a little bit earlier. We've had used sulfur at times when we've dealt with wine barrels. So that's one, because we find that wine barrels can be very problematic when you're starting to introduce them into your barrel room, because how long they've been sitting, where they've been sitting, even if they come in a little wet with the low ABV, you can have some major issues with those. So we have sulfured those before on occasion. So okay, and then so sometimes the Brett Peto, yes, absolutely, and we've seen that on our especially some of our wine barrel aged items we found. And if it gets overwhelming and it's kind of something that is not within the wheelhouse of what we want the final flavor of that beer to be, we will take those over. And the beauty of having a large barrel program that we have is that's probably going to be destined for some sort of barrel aged beer down the road that is going to be more on a sour side of things. So
all right. Susan Reinkert has a couple of questions here. First one is Jeff and Susan Reinkert here in Milford, Michigan. So I know Jeff. I don't know that I've met Susan.
Oh, beautiful lady.
Yes. Wonderful to have you here. And the next one is also Jeff Reinkert here. Any hints on the Oktoberfest German partner this year? If you can't say, I understand.
Are you guys going to be the first to know? Jeff, you're going to be upset at me. We are not going to partner with anybody this year. Which is, I know. Don't get mad at me. Don't shoot the messenger. Yeah, we were kind of going back and forth. And we kind of want to go on our own thing. We loved our partnerships that we did. So I don't know how to answer that nicely. I mean, we're just they kind of came down to like the 11th hour, and we're like, okay, let's just go ahead and make our own Oktoberfest, go that route, and see. It's a tough, and I'll get a little deep in the woods here. It's in a lot of ways, Sierra Nevada is old school. We do a lot of things a little bit different than a lot of breweries, but it does come down at some point to selling beer on occasion. We always struggle with, and seasonals are down across the board for every single brewery out there. And I love seasonal beers because it's really, it's like it's the same thing. It's like I don't want summer all year round, right? And I don't want winter all year round. So I look forward to the changes of the season. And when I talk about that, it's more of like as a traditional brewer and someone that was raised with more of a traditional brewing background, is I look forward to spring when, my box came out and kind of a little easier drinking beers, or, like we're always forced, like, and we're not forced. I know, 10 minutes.
We have 10 minutes and 7 questions.
Okay. We're not always forced, I feel like sometimes we are forced by the consumer that we have to have an IPA in every single, and I love IPAs, don't get me wrong. But our spring seasonal, we always fought with that one. And why it's a spring seasonal, I don't know, but it's January through March. It's just, as a 40th anniversary hoppy IPA. And it's like, it's done pretty well. It did better than the brewed IPA last year, but sometimes some of those decisions come down to they do become business decisions, and unfortunately, that's kind of the area where we're at now with just how the industry is. I'm going to just bring up. I'm like, this is a total bummer, right? I'm like bringing up bummer.
Well, no, I'll add one thing, Terence. Though, and you heard Scott Jennings talking about this. He is going to help us do kind of an exclusive on the Celebration Ale this fall. Mm-hmm. So speaking of seasonal beers, we're going to have some coverage on that, which will be fun.
That one. My favorite beer we make. I mean, it is like, that is, in to get back to what I was saying about waiting for that season to change. It's like when that thing comes, or when that beer is on tap, it's like a little piece of heaven.
See, right there on your screen, right?
Yeah, exactly, right there. Okay,
all right.
Rip through these other questions. Sorry,
one minute apiece.
Okay.
All right. So, Mark, how long do you age the beer?
Barrel aging depends on the style of beer. So when you get probably bigger. General rule of thumb: larger the higher the ABV, more dark and intense the flavors are, probably longer you're going to age it. My personal opinion.
All right. Next question comes from Scotty B. So, any vanilla beans in the base of the Narwhal beer recipe?
Nope. It just comes out.
That's a really short answer.
But
okay.
I think because we're talking about doing little variants of this particular beer, and we experimented with a peanut butter version of this, and it was really killer. And if we do it, it's going to be exclusive to our gift shops. So stay tuned. If that ends up coming up, you need to get some friends to go over there, buy you some, and ship it to you if you don't live close by.
Well, I trust you now. You steered me well on this barrel-aged torpedo. I'm a little reticent on the peanut butter one, but sounds interesting.
I'm not a fan, but I tasted it. I always say that peanut butter beers remind me of my father, and he used to love peanuts, and he used to leave cans of peanuts laying around the house, and every once in a while you'd grab one and you'd reach inside, and it was all rancid. So that always reminds me of that whenever I have peanut butter and a peanut butter beer. So, anyway.
So we're down to 6 minutes.
Okay.
And we have 4 questions. So Jason is asking, when you put beer in barrels, is it right at the end of fermentation without filtering, so it has the remains of yeast in the barrels? And do you put anything else in the barrels with the beer?
Yeah, we add, so it's post fermentation. So the fermentation's done. Generally speaking, it's probably pretty. We'll chill it down just to get most of the sediment to drop out of it. So usually we'll drop to, like, the barrel aged narwhal is down to 45 degrees. We start getting some of that. We don't want all the sediment in the barrels, so we'll try to get as much out as possible without filtering. And then we don't add anything else unless it actually requires via recipe. So if we're
so you minimize the yeast.
We minimize the yeast. Yeah, it's still going to have some yeast in it, though. But definitely we'll only add, and a lot of times when we're adding something else in it, coffee or something like that, we do that pretty close to actually when we're going to package, so that characteristic is fresh as possible, whether it's vanilla beans, coconut, coffee, whatever. Okay.
5 questions in 4 minutes. Oh, Victor asks, did you recently change all Cascade and let me try this again.
Yes, I know.
Did you recently change to all Cascade and Pale Ale? I remember seeing Magnum and Pearl listed before.
I will, yes. And I apologize for this. I lost the argument. We will substitute. Originally, when I started working here, it was Pearl as the bittering hops, and we switched to Magnum, and we would go back to Pearl, and we go to Magnum. We still add a little bit of bittering hop that is not Cascade, but the thought was to just go 100% Cascade, because we're probably not getting too much from the Magnum Pearl anyways in the finished beer. And I lost that argument of, let's just change the website so it's 100% Cascade. Okay. You got some actual truth out of me there that, again, I'll probably get in trouble for. Okay, can you add sorbate or sulfite to the barrel of beer to prevent infection?
Well, let me add one thing. I see Jeff Rankert on there, and I mentioned the AHA governing committee. I know Jeff is running also for a renewal on him, and Jeff is such a great guy. If you haven't voted yet, please consider voting for Jeff, and I appreciate all the great questions. All right, so Don asked almost the second to last question: can you add sorbate and sulfite to a barrel of beer to prevent infection? Understand it will have to be force carbed.
I know sulfites are added. We've never played with sorbates. So, yep.
All right, last question, and we've got just a couple of minutes left. This comes from Kristen. How much oak chips per gallon do you recommend?
I'm not going to recommend any, because we have rarely used oak chips. So there's probably someone on here. Please, someone write in really quick. How much would you use?
I bet Jeff knows. and Joseph and a bunch of others. So write that in the chat. So as we wrap up, Terence, we've got about 2 minutes, and this is a hard stop at 120 minutes. It literally will turn off.
Okay.
Peter Simmons says, great stuff today. Cheers to both. Jeff says, thanks, Doug. Jeff also says, thanks for all you know, Terence. Lots of people appreciating it. So, Terence, in the last few minutes, 90 seconds, how would you summarize barrel aging and recommendation for those of us that love it and want to do more of it?
Just keep doing it. Because really, one of the things that I tell a lot of people about our program and what's going on, and I haven't said it yet, I'm going to say it now. We learn every single day. Like, literally, we learn, well, when we drink barrel-aged beers every single day, which we don't do it every single day. We take Saturdays and Sundays off on occasion. But it's literally, it's a work in progress all the time, and you learn something new all the time, and just keep doing it. There is just some magic that can come from barrel aging beers, and just love doing it and love seeing what actually comes out. Our Alpha Hop program is an excellent example of what happens with certain ingredients. So,
Well, and I want to share those beautiful beers. I didn't center them up perfectly, but what a beautiful array of delicious beers. We have 30 seconds before a hard stop. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. This was so much fun. Terence, thank you for all this time. You've been so generous, and we've had such delicious beers. I can't thank you enough.
Hey, I'm right at the start of my probably 10-day vacation, so I'm looking forward to it. So great hanging out with all of you. Great program you do, Doug. This is really truly amazing. Got to get more of our employees on here. Cheers.
Cheers.